Hey, welcome back to my channel. Today we talk about the AFCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area. What does that mean? It's under the African Union is established to allow African countries to trade amongst itself, export raw materials amongst Africa, produce and export finished goods within Africa. It's gonna be a great one. You see? So African countries can actually do it to trade amongst themselves freely, fairly, across borders, removing border delays or lowering custom duties, licensing and border blockades. That would be a very wonderful one. Africa has what it takes. It's just that most of the times you don't even know what the problems are. Africa has over 1.4 billion people. Majority of them are young in their youth, below the age of 25. Over 50-something states. Africa has or is stated to be one of the youngest or the fastest growing continent. Yet, most of the African trades happens outside of Africa. So, what if Africa could truly trade amongst itself within African countries, over 50-something states existing in African continents? So, since the birth of this framework, this trading framework since in 2021, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, Cameroon, Rwanda, Egypt, Mauritius, and Tunisia has traded under this trade agreement, the AFCFTA trade agreement. They might be small, starting, but it shows that something has already begun. Africa is actually getting to some point where we are actually seeing something really good amongst African countries, in African continent. So, is it really that important? Is it really achievable? Yeah, it is very much achievable because that is the vision of the AFCFTA. It's already happening in African countries and we're waiting for its materialization in full bloom, like where these African countries can actually trade among themselves free of tariff, easily across borders. Out of the 54 African countries, about 48 of them are connected through lands. They have common land borders. So why won't that be possible? So this framework was created with the sole purpose to help to provide and assist and foster inter-African trade, intra-African trades amongst African countries. Even though most African countries are still not trading amongst African countries right at the moment. Most of their trades, most African countries' trades are with Europe, America, and China. But gradually, Africa is calling or pulling the African countries and their leaders together to work to achieve this purpose. For example, Nigeria still trades with Europe, shipping oil to Europe while importing tomatoes from countries like Italy and other European countries. But actually, Nigeria can export oil to African countries that does not have oil and buy whatever raw materials that maybe so many African countries that are into agriculture, farming. Nigeria can buy things from these other countries, that will boost the continent's trade. That is what it means. Africa trading within Africa, trading raw materials, goods and services, returning the continent's wealth, trading within Africa. That is what the major purpose of the African Free Continental Trade Area is all about, promoting intra-African trades amongst African countries. So, not buying things from outside and bringing it. How does the continent grow? With all this being said, with Africa having over 1.4 billion people, and majority of them in their youth, and over 50-something nations, and rated as one of the youngest or the fastest growing continent, it's totally achievable to have one single market. And also having over 48 countries that are landlocked, you moved from this border to another border, which from this country to another country, about 48 of them, you can move through land borders, having road networks connecting each of these countries together, apart from few of the countries that are island, like Comoros, Seychelles, and Mauritius, some of those small islands in Africa. But aside that, other African countries, you can actually move from Nigeria to Mali, to Guinea, to South Africa, Namibia, you name it, they have a common land border that you can actually connect all these African countries together. So giving them a common space where Africans can trade together, intertrade amongst each other, not needing outsiders. That will return prosperity in Africa. What do you think? Africa is actually dreaming big and we are here applauding and knowing that everything working out well will be for the good of Africa. So,
ladies and gentlemen, we must move from competition amongst ourselves to cooperation and collaboration. From exporting raw materials to building value chains that retain wealth within our borders. The free movement of people, goods and services across our borders. True integration will only be achieved when an African can travel, work and invest freely anywhere within our continent.